the interim, it would be great just to throw where you're joining from into the chat so we get an idea of where you're all joining us from today. Just for, practicing what I preach. I'm Paul, and I'm from the UK, as you can probably tell by my accent. I'm based in our London office, but currently I'm still at home, which is just north of London, south of Cambridge. And we're joined today by Jeff. So Jeff, sort of give away his location.
Yeah, hey all. Thanks for joining, but my name's Jeff, based in our Carlsbad headquarters in San Diego, California. So Paul, did you play the guitar before this session? Is that how you got ready for the presentation?
Yeah, always. It's my reset that I give myself. So I use time blocking as a principle for when I'm doing my work. So I set myself, I've got to clear my inbox. Here is 2 hours of time. If I clear it in an hour and 40, I set aside 2 hours and I give myself that time back in the form of playing guitar, which keeps me sane. It keeps me focused. And then once those 20 minutes are up, it's back to what I was doing before. But yeah, no, I find that having that ability to break it up is really useful. And it's probably one of those things that, I think everyone's picked up bad habits during the pandemic. And I can only imagine my colleagues dismay when
I picked up golf. I think it's a good habit.
Well, no, I was going to say when I go back to the office and I take my guitar with me as my break, and people sort of turn around and say, "Oh no, here we go."
Do this. We've got Las Vegas, Fort Lauderdale, Germany, Arizona, LA. So we're touching a few different continents here, and West Coast, East Coast, US. Cool. So want to give it one more minute, Paul, and then we'll kick it off?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Cool. We're gonna throw it on mute for a quick second here and let everyone join in. Ooh, Mexico, Carlsbad. I got a neighbor here. I like it. Well, welcome all.
Italy. Norway, Gloucester, Panama. Oh, wow, very international.
Ooh, Panama. My dad just got back from Panama yesterday. He was fishing. He caught a 171-pound tuna. 2 Panamas.
What is pounds in kilos for our non-US?
It's too early for math for me, converting in the US.
Is it big?
Big.
It's big. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we can agree on the fact that it's big.
There we go.
About half. Okay, so
let's kick it off.
Like the size of me. That's a big fish.
Yeah.
That's during lockdown weight. So yeah, it's a very big fish.
Yeah.
Cool. Right, we should probably get started. So for those of you who missed at the start, obviously 77 kilos. Yeah, it's a bit heavier than me right now. Said today, what we're going to be focusing on is, what increases or decreases EPMV. And we're going to be running through some of the different factors that can have a play. Obviously, when we're looking at it, there are obviously multiple factors, and we do our best to cover some of them today, or at least, some of the major ones where we'd start as touch points. But before we do that, we're going to take some time just to introduce ourselves and let you know who we are today. So my name's Paul Round. I'm one of the publisher success managers here at Zoic. I've been with the company for 2 years now. But all in all, I've spent about 8 years working in account management, split between the pharmaceutical industry and the tech industry. In pharma, I was working for Pfizer, who were relatively big before, but obviously off the back of the vaccines have become more of a household name. When I'm not at work, things I like to do is I'm a keen sportsman. I really enjoy running, field hockey, which has started up again, which is great. And I've got a match this evening, which is excellent. And golf. And also, as you can see behind, as I was explaining before, play a lot of guitar as well, which is something that's kept me sane whilst working from home. So that's just a bit of
as long as it's not Stairway.
Yeah, I mean, try and playing that in a guitar shop. It
Right.
doesn't go down particularly well. As long as it's not the opening. Play some of the cooler riffs, you're fine, but it's not that. Jeff, what about yourself?
Yeah, awesome. So my name is Jeff. I'm the Global Director of Publisher Success. I've been with Zoic for a couple of years now, and have spent about 10 years in the ad tech space. Work with all different types of publishers, from food bloggers, travel blogs, gaming sites, all the way up to some of the big traditional brand medias like New York Times and Gatehouses and Gannett. So I've seen quite a bit over the past 10 years. I mentioned early on, I think during COVID, golf has probably been my main sanity check. So I've been enjoying it a lot, getting out a couple times a week, practicing and getting some rounds in. And I also shared earlier, my dad was just in Panama and caught a big fish, but I once caught a 452-pound marlin in Baja. So I do enjoy fishing, especially with a dad. Good time to bond. So I know you'll hit the next slide there, Paul, but one thing I want to preface, I want to first of all thank everybody for joining us today. It's really exciting to see everybody, across the world, across the globe that steps in and joins. That's one thing we very much embrace at Ezoic, is just the diverse nature of our publisher segments, as well as our team. So, a lot of you may or may not know, but we've got team members that speak English, Spanish, French, German, Italian, Russian, Finnish, Croatian. So we're a pretty diverse group, and we think it helps represent the diverse clientele we have as well. Today's topic is what increases or decreases EPMV, and this is actually, Paul's going to do a little more intro, but this is one of those questions that comes in all the time because of all the fluctuations, and there's so many nuances to it. We wanted to spend a little bit more time kind of peeling it back a little bit from a high level to share.
Yeah, no, that's true. I've just seen a comment in the chat. Robert Spears said that audio is cutting out. Is there one of us in particular who you're struggling to hear just before we try and do a whole webinar and it's inaudible? Just want to make sure that we get that sorted. Audio is fine for both of my end. Okay, cool. Sorry, no, it's fine. Obviously, it's better just to check now before we do the whole thing and no one can hear a word that we're saying. So just wanted to check. Also, just to let you know before we start, guys, we do have the Q&A function. So as we're going through, if questions come up, please feel free to throw them in. If it's relevant and I see it on time, I'll try and answer it as we're going through. If not, like I said, we've got loads of time at the end. So we'll make sure that we sort of hit on everything. So if you have a question, we'll make sure that it's answered before we finish the session. So, like EPMV trends, what causes EPMV? Why does it go up? Why does it go down? I mean, surely that's the question that everyone would like to know the answer to. And often a lot of credit is given to the site's content niche or category, and a lot of focus is placed on the geographical origin of your visitors as the factor for what an average RPM or EPMV will actually be. But those factors do matter, but there are only a handful of other factors that are at play. I would say that when we're looking at an EPMV drop or increase, those are some of the things that we'd start with. But it can be much more nuanced than just your traffic is from US, therefore it's going to be expensive. Your traffic is from the UK, therefore it will be less valuable. In many cases, too much credit is given to these factors. Some niche content can vary in EPMV alone on the same site by over 1,000%. So there are other factors at play. And when we look at the graph, we can see these fluctuations at play. So new visitors versus return visitors, there's a swing of about 17%. The browser in question, if you're using the Do browser from China, it's 253% less valuable than Google Chrome, probably to do with the ability to track and serve personalized ads. I think that's the same for DuckDuckGo. Blocking tracking script is down 91%. We can see that. So that's the SERP. The browser itself, we can see that Chrome is performing better than Safari, and also the device type plays a big part as well. And we do look at why that is later on in the presentation, but it's just good to sort of see from an overview that all of these factors can have a play. So the question of why is my EPMV down isn't necessarily always as straightforward as because this is the answer. So it's just worth bearing that in mind at the start, that's the level that we're going to be looking at. Market trends. I mean, this is one of the more important and often turns out to be a factor in why ad revenues increased or decreased is due to ad rates that are at play in your country. So I actually have here a live version of the ad revenue index, which I'm going to flick to. And we can see very nicely how seasonality is at play. So I'm going to look at just US traffic, and we can roll it back. So we can kind of see here that, you know, there's a very clear and defined pattern that shows us, you know, how trends change over the course of the year. So for example, January historically is low. We can see in these sections here, and throughout the year, ad revenue increases till we hit peak seasonality on and around Black Friday. It's always the case. 2020, of course, is a year like no other, has a slightly different traffic profile. We can see this is when lockdown started to be announced. We saw a huge drop off. However, over the course of the year, we saw revenues recover back up to a very strong finish for the year. For those of you who haven't used the ad revenue index in the past, or maybe used it historically and haven't come back to it since, one of the things to check out is the fact that we now have it set up by country. So, you know, Jeff and I both work in the publisher success team, and it's very useful to be able to sort of show different people, different publishers, the traffic composition from different parts of the globe. So, for example, if your traffic is majority from the States, this is very useful. However, if you have also traffic from the UK, being able to see how that differs to the US is great. So you can see on average, traffic is less valuable. One of the things that I noticed currently is that the current rates in France are actually 10 points higher than they are in the US. I don't know if you've seen that before, Jeff, where France is outperforming the US, but it's another one of those points that I said at the start, that just because your traffic's from the US doesn't mean it's going to be higher than other nations, and we can see that currently at play.
Yeah, I think with this report's really good. I would say, you know, whenever you're looking at positive trends in earnings, is I would take a look at that and see if it's indicative of just seasonality. If you're seeing any slight dips, I'd look at that as well, and then look at your traffic and see which location is generating the most for you, and you can correlate. But yeah, I think last year brought a lot of interesting things for us. Each market is a bit different, and like even with France is, you know, France's lockdown and when they've been locked down and when they've been open actually hasn't been the same as the US or even in the UK, being as we have a good 10 plus team members that service the French market. There's different just buying behaviors that have occurred. And so, you know, not surprised that it's there now, because I know there was a bit more of a lockdown and open and then lockdown. So it's really about when advertisers are going to try to get their brand out there and try to drive purchases and trying to drive people to their sites and to their brand. So I know you're on India. India has been a really interesting one, I'd say, over 2020. Probably a little bit heartbreaking for a lot of Indian traffic bloggers.
Just a touch. So yeah, I mean, the first thing that I would always recommend is just checking this out. You know, if we're seeing a spike and you're seeing a spike, that's great. If there's a slight drop in the revenue index and you're also seeing that mirrored in your traffic, you know, everything else being the same, it's important to know that seasonality in ad rates can be at play here. There are different types of seasonality due to sort of content specific times. But we will sort of pick up on that later. There is one question that I will answer very quickly because it's relevant to now. So it's what happened to Indian traffic earnings, and it's just the impact of COVID. You know, when that hit, the value that advertisers were willing to pay has decreased, and it really hasn't recovered yet. And we're seeing the unfortunate scenes where India is actually going through a rather devastating second wave currently. And we've seen that when COVID infections have increased in countries, the rates and advertisers are willing to pay has decreased. You know, with that lack of ability for people to leave the house and to actually act as consumers, that what can you really advertise to them, and the value is not quite there. So it's still pandemic related, which is crazy to believe that, you know, we first started hearing about this in December 2019, that it's still a factor, but I mean, we're all still working from home, so clearly it's still having an impact on what we're seeing.
Awesome. So the next thing I like to look at is trends of your revenue, looking at it by week, day, month, as well as on the per user basis. So when you're looking at like trends, and if you're seeing positive or negative, is you're trying to find correlation and you're relating that over time, right? So January and comparing it to March most likely is going to have drastically different outcomes. So January is post Q4, it's beginning of Q1. Typically advertisers spend less. That means the value of your user is going to be a little bit less during that time. You can correlate that back to the ad revenue index and see the trend there. But if you compare that to March, you're naturally going to see a bigger uptick typically in March because it's the end of Q1, which is when advertisers tend to spend more. So in big data analytics, under the revenue tab, you can go in and you can look and compare different periods. I highly recommend looking at year over year. That always gives you a good, gist, especially if your site's been around for a longer period of time. If it's a newer site or if you're like drastically growing, the year over year might not be perfect for you, but you can start looking at shorter durations and compare them either to previous months or previous quarters, and give you a good like cadence of, hey, is something positive happening? What positive is happening here? Like, let's keep that going. Or, hey, like COVID hit, right? And all of a sudden things are down. Well, let me take a look at those snapshots and figure out what it is. Is it anything changing of content, or is it literally just market circumstances that are essentially out of most of our control at that point? So again, this would be the second thing I look at outside of the ad revenue index to get a good idea of where you're pacing on your site as well. You might hear us say next slide. Paul just told me that there's a meme in the UK that's trending right now. That's next slide, next slide. I haven't seen it, but we may try to add to that today.
It's great.
Yeah. So this is a screenshot again in big data analytics. It really relates to the previous slide as well, but just to show you like how drastically different even a given day can be. So like if you look at your site, there's so much just either seasonality or just trends that you might have on a weekly basis. I see sites where traffic and earnings go up Monday through Friday. On the weekends, they dip. I've seen some that are the opposite. I've got a client who puts out a major release newsletter once a month, and it trends for about 5 days, and all the money is made during that period of time. And then it kind of goes back down and flattens out a little bit. But this slide gives you an idea of like how drastic that can be and things to look at. So like if you look at the bottom, it's a Sunday on February 28th, and then you compare it to a Wednesday on March 31st, and knowing March 31st is the end of Q1, which typically is an uptick in higher EPMV and CPM. So it gives you an idea of what that is. So try to like peel back the layers, look at different data points, and it's going to help you better understand what's going on with your EPMV as you're diving in.
Next slide, please.
That's right. I should say. Cool. Yeah, and again, we'll share this video after this. You guys can take a look at it, but it's sort of serves as kind of a checklist of what to look at. But you really want to take a look and identify the sources of higher or lower earnings. So some questions you might ask is, did you see an increase or decrease between that time period? If so, what and why? EPMV is going to change when traffic changes as well. So you can all of a sudden get a big wave of traffic to your site, but if it comes from a certain location, there might be a different value on that traffic than, if it's, as we said, something from India versus something in the US today, or even something in Canada versus the US. The topic of the content could have a different user as well. So, even if traffic's going up, doesn't necessarily mean your EPMV will go up. It also doesn't mean it's going to go down. It has its own sort of demographic or whatnot for that. So I'd say just keep an eye on that. Look at the content that's being produced. Look at where the traffic is coming from, and then you can relate that to your EPMV as you look at it. So you'll have some kind of correlation from that. Paul's going to get into it a little bit later on as well, but receiving traffic from certain platforms, devices, and audience with lower ad rates doesn't typically have an impact on ad rates for higher earning forms of traffic. So they can be isolated. You can have certain pages that are performing extremely well, and you can have a newer article that it's just getting traction, so it might be slightly lower. So it might technically look like a dip, but it's really not. You're still going to be making more money, and you're growing your traffic at that point.
Yeah, that's the important bit. It's like just because one article may go viral in an area with lower EPMV, which overall drags everything down, the bottom line is that there's still more revenue than there would have been had it not done that.
So, yeah, and it's the same with the opposite. There's certain content that gets released and it hits the right audience and the right segment, and advertisers recognize that, and it's going to just make things go up as well. I'm good on that one, Paul.
Done that one. All right, sorry. So yeah, no, when we're looking at, as Jeff mentioned, the way that certain platforms perform, there is a difference between that. So you can see in this slide here, in the image, when we're looking at mobile, for example, with an EPMV of 25 versus desktop of 35 here, it always does tend to be the case that desktop outperforms. Like, traditionally, it is a higher earner. While that's not always strictly true, I would say that for the majority of sites that I've worked with, the desktop site does monetize more efficiently from an EPMV perspective than the mobile version of the site does. If we think about why that could be, we think about the size of the screen on desktop, the number of ads that can show at one time versus mobile. If you were to sort of have 4 or 5 ads, that would literally be the entire page versus desktop where that's possible. Another thing to think about is, user intent, which again, we'll touch on in slightly more detail later on. If I'm browsing on my phone looking for some information versus, being sat at a desk prepared to sort of engage with the content more thoroughly, advertisers pick up on those soft signals, and as a result are willing to change their advertising behavior and the value that they're willing to attribute to that behavior accordingly. So there are differences. So if you're sat there and you can see that there's, your mobile is performing worse than desktop, don't feel that you're an outlier or that something's wrong. It's fairly typical to see that sort of behavior. In order to find this report in Big Data Analytics, what you need to do is open Big Data Analytics, go down the side, and it's under the Technology tab, and then search by device. And what that will do is it will throw up all of this information. This again is particularly useful to help understand how different visitors are interacting with your content, as I've said, by device.
Yeah, I'll add on this one. I think it's pretty interesting to me. When you see traffic spikes or traffic growth, the device type is pretty important as it relates to EPMV. If you're identifying that a bunch of your traffic is coming in from desktop, typically that'll help drive a spike of EPMV or increase EPMV. Whereas if I've seen certain types of content that are consumed primarily on mobile and traffic like skyrockets, you could actually see a dip in EPMV even though your traffic is drastically going up. And it really just, again, it has to do with device type. So I think that's definitely one to keep in mind, because you can definitely isolate that and say, oh, okay, that makes sense to me. And now I have a better understanding of where I'm at today and why it's going in the direction it is.
Yep, absolutely. So looking here as well, content attracts your audience. It kind of makes sense, but that's the important part. That's what advertisers will come to look for, and that's going to determine the value of the site. Your site doesn't operate as an individual entity. So you have your site, you have your domain, but what we're going to look at moving forward is how those individual components of the site can be broken down, and how one page can have a value, another a wildly different one. So again, if a certain page was to receive more traffic, which has a lower EPMV, traffic could increase, but it would actually overall decrease your EPMV. As a real world example of this, I was working with a site who looked at home decor ideas, and they were spending a lot of time writing articles about garden features. It wasn't as profitable as writing about other factors. And when pointing this out, they changed their strategy, and as a result, were able to sort of hone in on areas that could help shape the EPMV slightly better. So here we said article A can produce a $20 EPMV, while article B produces a $30 EPMV. Just by this nature, we're going to see a fluctuation as one gets slightly more traffic than the other, and that's completely normal and just part of the experience. Again, one of the good things to do here is to go into big data, to have a look at the landing pages data, to pull it up and to sort of compare the two, and to see where the discrepancies between them are occurring. And as the information here says, drag and drop the columns around to find the best view for yourself to sort of better digest and understand the information that you can see.
Yeah, I'd use this report, as Paul mentioned in his real world example, but I'd use this report on ideas for content creation as well. Is, if you can take a look at your top 10, top 20 articles and see how they're performing, pinpoint a few of them that are outperforming others, and sort of either add to those articles, expand them, create, you know, similar content that are sort of in that same realm, similar types of keywords, it can really incrementally impact you positively from a traffic perspective as well as from a revenue perspective. So use that like real world data to make good business decisions, to put out the type of content that's going to monetize the way that you want as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just look at the image here, we can see that the same article sorry, oversensitive mouse. The same article at different times of the year can monetize considerably differently. I know we looked at that slightly earlier on as well. And I know one of the things that we flagged earlier was looking at seasonality when it comes to ad rates, but you also have to be aware about seasonality of your content too. So is there a particular reason why this article is performing better now at this time of the year than it was in January? Revenue is one explanation, but again, another real world example I had as I was helping someone look into their site. It was a quote site, and they noticed that they had a spike in revenue around the 17th of March, and were curious to know, you know, what had caused it. Digging into it, looking at landing pages, I found that, you know, they got the majority of their traffic that day to St. Patrick's Day quotes, being the 17th of March, which drove traffic, it drove revenue, and then it dropped off. So not only is the seasonality when it comes to revenue, but also understanding the content and the landing pages that individuals are accessing will really help understand why there can be these fluctuations in traffic. But you can see here that over time, this page has has increased in EPMV by 171% due to the nature. And I'd be hesitant to say that that's just ad revenue index. I think there'll be other factors at play there. What do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, I think you nailed it.
Oh, thank you. So yeah, next slide then. So again, going back to what we were saying, it's a further example. The site in question, if one page has a landing page with $53 EPMV, one with a $7 EPMV, one with a $20 EPMV, if this $53 EPMV page is getting all the traffic, suddenly the $7 EPMV page gets more traffic. What we'll see is that traffic can increase and revenue can decrease. So although it sometimes is frustrating and disheartening to see, hey, my traffic's increasing, but my revenue is going down, there's normally a logical explanation as to why that happens. And I think as well, it's just important to know that this is not unusual. It's very common to see sites that have landing pages with wildly fluctuating EPMVs and performance. And I think it's once you fully understand your traffic and where it's coming from and which articles perform best, it starts to demystify that my revenue's dropped, like what's changed. And it's a case of, I see, like it's just the yearly cycle moving on. There's other things as well we can do to help. Jeff, Google Search Console.
Yep. So one of the things that's really cool about Ezoic is just the ability to connect different data sets. So one of the things I'd highly recommend is connecting your Google Search Console to Ezoic under the SEO tab. This is gonna help give you just additional data sets within BDA that help you better understand your traffic fluctuation and really search, especially Google search results, which is one of the better monetization referral sources. So one of the areas that I think is super cool about this is by connecting, you're able to see basically traffic and visitors based on keywords and just the differences between those keywords. And how it impacts positively or negatively to your EPMV and to your overall revenue. You're able to look at behavior and changes over time as well to see how keywords are picking up and starting to trend upward for you. You also can look at your rankings and changes there, how that impacts EPMV, how does that impact traffic. Obviously, if rankings go up, it's going to typically drive more traffic for you, but then it's how does that advertiser value that traffic, right? But you can capture that and you can track that. Advertisers do bid differently based on queries. So even a same article could get various different bids based on the type of search query that the user put in to find that content, right? So it is that granular today. And then that's also then going to help you track EPMV over time. Also, I just share this as well as if you're having and you want a second set of eyes looking at just your overall traffic and what's going on with it, especially if you're starting to use, Leap as we release that to help you all with Core Web Vitals. You might have some of your success managers try to dive into your Search Console as well and give you any feedback or best practices there as well.
Yeah, no, we're happy to do that. It's also very useful to connect to Google Search Console if you'd like to use one of our tools, such as the title tag tester, which is the ability for you to basically do what it suggests, whereby you change up the different tag titles for your articles. It gets put into SERP, and we're able to test which one works best. So it's another way of helping gain traffic, and I think that's one of the things that we're looking to do is, where else can we help our publishers? And we think that in the SEO sphere, by helping demystify and helping them understand, what contributes to SEO, there's a real benefit to you guys from a monetization perspective.
Awesome. I sort of hit on these in the previous, but a couple of things to really focus on is once you're connected, you can get in there and take a look at the data, but it gives you an idea to look at different queries, how different queries perform. You can break it down by page as well as rankings. And it really just helps you quantify your SEO efforts and just helps guide you into putting efforts in the right place and putting your energy in the right place. So at the end of the day does an increase in ranking help hurt? This is just a question, but does increase in ranking help hurt EPMV for the queries? So like, this is the type of reporting that'll let you identify that. Like, if I rank higher, where is that traffic coming from? Is my EPMV going up? And you have a better idea of what that does. To find this is SEO tab and then Search Console, and then you can drag and drop various columns to put them in the order that best suits the query that you're looking for.
I think another benefit of this is if you are using big data fairly frequently and you're familiar with the way that the tool works, it's just presenting that data in a format that you understand a little bit better. And I know personally, obviously working for Zoe, I spend a lot of time using the tool. So for me, it just makes it easier for me to digest that information in a format that I'm more familiar with rather than within Search Console. So I think there's another benefit there as well.
Awesome. So this one really just goes over just making sure you guys understand the granularity that you have, but you can run filters that include keyword to see how different types of queries for the same keyword affect EPMV. So a great example of this is how to content generating has a higher EPMV than what is content. And so you can plug those in, see what the impact is of that, and then you can troubleshoot to figure out, okay, hey, this is why I'm spiking up, this is why EPMV slightly went down, because even though it's the same article, the way that the user got to it is somehow deemed of more value to the advertiser, right? So this again helps you get to a better understanding of that. And then on the bottom is you can essentially just add filters, select queries, and then you include the keyword, and then it allows you to essentially run the report that you're looking for. Jeff be sleeping. They look tired? Maybe. Early in California. I don't know. Maybe it's my really thick glasses that I'm wearing today too. Awesome. So number 17. Here we go. So content and categories. So this is really, really cool. We definitely highly recommend that you properly classify your content categories according to open web standards. This is going to allow you to really dig further into classified content to identify the highest earning forms of content. So you can see the different categories on the left-hand side, from bass fishing, deep sea fishing, fly fishing, to freshwater. And it lets you really look at, again, like user behavior as well as earnings and RPMs. And you'll see, like fly fishing, for instance, the time on site is higher than everything else. Bounce rates lower. The number of articles is, I would say, in the middle range there. but the RPM is higher than the rest. And so you can kind of see the correlation of time on site, low bounce rate, decent volume of articles, and then what that performance looks like as well. And then it allows you to compare to the other categories. So definitely make sure that you're categorizing it the appropriate way, and then it'll help you align with your site as well on the data.
Yeah, I also think it just presents opportunities. You know, like as I mentioned earlier, if you're spending all your time writing about, for example, gear with a 750 RPM when you could be writing about fly fishing, is that really the best investment that you're making into your site and your business? Or if you use this data and see actually the content that's found to be more valuable is writing about fly fishing, I'll do more of that instead. It's almost like I knew you were coming and picked this particular category.
Yeah, on this one too is I think seasonality can play an impact here as well, right? So if you look at the left side, so like ice fishing versus fly fishing or freshwater or deep sea fishing, 9-day different, right? So deep sea fishing, depending on your location, where you are on the equator, sorry, I know too much about fishing, can have an impact just like ice fishing. Like that's pretty much going to be a winter sport. So if you're putting out ice fishing content in the summertime, not sure it's going to monetize the right way, unless it's early on and they're essentially starting to plan their trip to go fishing.
Absolutely. I think that again also really reinforces what we started with by saying is, look at the date ranges and understand the way that people are interacting with it at certain times. Do that year-over-year comparison and get that deeper understanding, because again, it just seeks to demystify, like, hey, I was making more, now I'm not. What's changed? Oh, people aren't ice fishing because it's July. Like those sorts of things can really help answer those questions. Traffic source.
This me or this you?
I can go.
So I love this one, by the way. I'll
let you go then.
Yeah, I'll hit it and you can pipe in, but this is a major one that I'd be looking at when you look at EPMV, and just traffic in general. Is this, the source makes a huge difference. If you're getting organic traffic, it tends to be, you tend to be able to count on it a bit more. Of course, there's going to be algorithm updates that are out of all of our control, but you tend to be able to rely on that organic traffic, and you can kind of build some consistency with it. Whereas other traffic, you're going to have more fluidity and up and down. So if you're driving traffic based on social media or Facebook, if it's very loyal, that's one thing. But if you're purchasing it from there, it can have very drastic impacts of EPMV and traffic. Paid, same thing. Like if you bought traffic for a given month and all of a sudden you didn't, it's like the quality of that traffic makes a big difference. We've seen people purchase traffic and things tank because the quality of the traffic is just not good. So it does have a big impact. Direct is obviously going to be pretty good. That tends to be a pretty loyal audience. Is then, as well as like newsletter, and if you're like sort of cultivating your own lists and starting to push your content direct to them, those are great ways. And we've seen clients be very successful that are going down that path. So when you're taking a look at just overall visits, EPMV, and revenue, this is again one of the first top 5 things I'd be looking at is where is that coming from, and how does that relate to where you're at. Sorry, I took that over, Paul.
Right, absolutely fine. I would have said something pretty similar. It really can be a differentiator. 100 visits from Google versus 100 visits from a mysterious newsletter can vary in value. Absolutely. Just seeing what else we've got on the slide here. So the traffic source. So in big data, so the traffic source. Again, like with others, you can add filters, dimensions to better understand, how are your users finding you, and how they end up on your site. Geography of traffic source. This is again, I know I said at the start, like this is a factor, but this is another report that I do tend to look at as an indication of if revenue's dropped, traffic composition. Say a site has a page that goes viral in a country with lower EPMV, traffic rises, EPMV declines, and it's quite easy to find it if we look at data over time in the location section. So for me, that's always a really key one. And you can see here that the same traffic on the same day, the US with the $20 EPMV, in the UK 14.32. So it's just that, you know, not all traffic is created equal. Animal Farm reference, but it's the case. You know, it's one visit does not equal $1, for example. It can vary due to all of the different factors that we've discussed throughout the presentation. But it's another really useful one just to check and just be aware of, and just have an understanding of where does your traffic come from, where are the opportunities. You know, if you're seeing lots of US traffic, obviously that pays slightly better. What can you do to get in front of a US audience?
Yeah, and I'd say, you know, in general, I mean, you want quality traffic coming to your site. Location is important, but like, and so I think when you create content, you want to factor that in. But you know, if you're getting diverse traffic from all over the globe, like that's a good thing. Advertisers will adjust. Just recognize that your niche, your brand, the, you know, the way that your site is gonna monetize might be a little bit different and might be a little bit more diverse, which is a good thing. So you know, and I'll just kind of add, you know, we've seen real world case studies where people all of a sudden hide pages and don't show pages because they don't want traffic coming in from a certain geography, because it might help them, you know, think that there's more value in the US or something like that. Like I would never, ever, ever do that. Like if you have audience in various parts of the world, that's okay. That's a good thing. Just keep growing your traffic, but just recognize that when you look at your EPMV, you look at, you know, similar sites, just compare based on geography so you have a better understanding.
It's that thing we mentioned earlier, whereby North Korean traffic. We mentioned earlier, you know, you don't, whilst your EPMV might decrease if there's traffic from other parts of the world, the revenue increases. So by having people view your traffic, your content, it's never a bad thing, because overall revenues will be up.
The North Korean traffic might be VPN'd, just saying. So it could come from any country.
It could indeed. But yeah, so just be aware that, as we said, you know, it's a factor, but not the be all and end all. So yeah, so every site's unique. So when we have questions like, hey, why is my EPMV down? Not only do we have to think about all of that information, but also sort of apply it to the individual site and get an understanding of the traffic, the seasonality, etc. But that's, you know, that is where, as we've been highlighting on the way through, that big data analytics is such a useful tool to dig in and to really understand, you know, what's changing on the page or what could have changed, in order to draw conclusions about why revenue has increased or decreased. On top of that, there's other reports to check out. So request time, framework, you know, Core Web Vitals. That's going to be a big thing this year. We know that Google's launching the new Core Web Vitals in May, and so we have a tool called Leap, which has been designed to help pass those. So if you do have any questions about that, we're more than happy to answer questions towards the end. But also user engagement is a really, really key thing for advertisers. As we've said, you know, looking at how your users are engaged with the page and the time on site, those things play a big part overall in your EPMV increasing or decreasing. So basic questions to ask yourself about changes to your site. These are sort of in addition to, or maybe things just to ask before, you know, coming to Zoic to ask about a deep dive, for example, like, did you delete or update any placeholders? You know, I've had people say in the past, oh, I thought the Zoic learning period was over, so I could delete certain placeholders. Zoic's constantly testing. It's constantly trying to find the best setup for your visitors and for your site. One of the benefits of Zoic is that it can continue to adapt over time. So last year, during when the pandemic hit, we saw that the way users interact with the internet shift pretty drastically. But the AI technology within the placeholders was able to adapt to ensure that it could learn this new behavior. So I would always recommend not deleting placeholders. It will always sort of adapt over time to show an optimal amount. But that's always one that I do see people say, I thought the learning period was over, so I could delete it now. It's not the case. Deleting placeholders 99.9% of the time will mean less revenue overall. Change your theme. Jeff, we hear this a lot. I changed my theme and I can't see my placeholders. What's up? Usually it's because the way that the placeholders are attached on the page is to certain divs that sit within the theme. If you remove the theme, the locations that the placeholders are attached to no longer exist, and those placeholders are removed. So changing a theme isn't necessarily a terrible thing, but if you're looking at doing it, I would hold off until Leap's been rolled out, because there will be recommendations about, what is a fast theme to help with core web vitals. So there will be more information there. But also, once you've changed your theme, check the page, check your top landing pages, check placeholders. If they're not showing, go in and re-add them, because if you change your theme, it can and often does remove placeholders from the page. So just be aware that if you are looking to do that, there will be a bit of manual work that's required there to put them back in. A limit on the number of placeholders on the page. Setting arbitrary caps hinders the machine learning. As I mentioned with one of the earlier points, over time, Mosaic looks at a number of factors. So average time on site, user engagement, bounce rate, all of those things, and understands traffic origin, the device type, the time of day. I mean, we even have a report in big data that looks at the weather. So all of these factors are being taken into consideration, and it's able to make an assessment on that individual that's visiting the site about what the optimal setup for them is. If you say, actually, I only want 3 to show at any one time, there could be a user that lands on the site that would be somewhat ad blind and open to more, but there's been an arbitrary cap set on what they can be shown. And we've shown time and time again that by adding these caps, we don't actually have the impact of improving UX. All it does is really hurt the bottom line. So if you do have max ads per page set up, it's one of those things that we recommend not having set up, if at all possible. Restrict any advertiser categories. We have advertiser categories. There could be things like, give me some advertiser categories, Jeff. So there's
well, I'll say in 2020 in the U.S., politics was one, and so there was a handful of sites that would restrict, political ads, and I totally get that. But political ads drive a tremendous amount of money, so that would be something that could change.
Yeah, I think there's also black magic maybe as well, which some people don't want to have on the site, which is fine if that's the personal preference. But just be aware that making these types of changes will have an impact on the way that the site monetizes overall. So yeah, action, reaction. Changing, removing ad styles. I personally don't like, is something that I hear people start with. I didn't like this ad, so I removed it. Deciding again in the same way that limiting the number of ads on the page, limiting the sizes that can be shown, can have an impact, and does have an impact on, I say can, it does have an impact on revenue overall. And by not being in a position where we can serve an optimal set out to the user, holds back the system from being able to perform as well as it can. And a final one just to consider is ads.txt enabled. I think most sites, we're at like 99% of our sites have ads.txt enabled now, which is great. If not, it's definitely something to look at. I know certain advertisers are starting to get to the point where they're saying they're not going to continue to bid on sites if ads.txt is not enabled. It takes like 5 minutes to get set up, if that. So if you haven't done it, it's something that I really recommend going in and doing.
Yeah, if you don't have ads.txt set up, I'm sure you've gotten some type of promotional email from us encouraging it, but you have to get it done. There are different demand partners out there that require it and will essentially not put demand or put ads on your site if you don't have it. So people like Amazon and those. So just make sure you have it. That way you're not limiting the competition on your site.
Yep. And then finally, just resources, where to go to get help. So for troubleshooting issues, we have support.zoic.com. We've recently introduced a really cool live chat feature. So if you have an urgent question, most of the time now you can actually gain access to one of our team live. So during normal office hours for the UK and the US, that feature is enabled. If it's outside of those times, you can create a ticket and one of the team will be able to get back to you there. So for urgent site down issues, issues with DNS records, something technical, absolutely that should be first port of call, is to head to support.zoic.com. Revenue and traffic, education, this webinar can help. We can watch it back another time. But on top of that, we have the ad revenue index, which we showcased during this webinar. Deep diving into big data analytics and having a hunt through to find the reports that you need, as well as just having a play around in your dashboard. You might be able to find some of the answers to some of the questions that you're looking for within there. From an education perspective, we have Zoic Explains, which is a blog that Tyler helps run. He's our CMO. And there's also an FAQ, which has answers to most of the questions. On top of that, we have our knowledge base. Again, if you're going in to create a ticket, you'll have to go through the knowledge base first. We have resources and articles pretty much about every situation now. So do check that out, because more often than not, there is an article that can help answer the question. On top of that, industry education. So I was reading off the slide. I know that's awfully dull for everyone, but I just want to make sure that signpost some of these bits. We have our blog and also the Publisher Lab podcast, again, which is hosted by Tyler.
Awesome, thanks, Paul. Yeah, I'll just add to that one. The troubleshooting area I think is really important. So we've spent a lot of time revamping our support.ezoic.com, which is our knowledge base. So there's a ton of articles there on topics, pretty much from 1 a.m. Pacific to 5 p.m. Pacific. Live chat is running outside of maybe a lunch break or something like that. So we have live agents that work for Ezoic, whether they are based in Carlsbad or based in our Newcastle office, that are manning the live chat that can answer questions on the fly. We're seeing responses within a minute. We're seeing resolution times within 20 minutes or so. For more complex topics or topics that require deep dives, obviously we're going to want to create tickets for those. I know some of you that have been with us for a while like to email direct to your PSMs or your success managers, which is totally okay, but I highly recommend using the knowledge base and asking questions there on the more urgent stuff. And then if you're looking to schedule times for reviews, that's when I think email is good. Or you can just ask one of our live agents to say, hey, I want to talk to one of my account managers, and can we get that booked? And they'll help you. So Paul, should we go into the Q&A?
Yep. Absolutely. There's a couple who have been quite patient, waiting for us to come through. So I think we should start. In the USA, what proportion of ads are served in Spanish, and should I create Spanish versions of blog posts?
I'll take that one. So I think I can't really give you a percentage of what ads are served in Spanish. It really is just going to depend on the user within that's to your site. What I would say is creating content in another language is a good idea. I think it's another way to make money. It expands your market. It's a different way to show up in search results. It diversifies your revenue stream. So I love that idea. That's something that we've talked about internally, about just creating sites in various languages. And I think it's definitely a good thing, especially if you have background in that language and you have passion for it. I'll add to that as well. We are global at Ezoic. So if you're not working with somebody that is in your native language, you're totally cool to ask. We have a team dedicated to the Latin American market, Spanish language, French market, German, Russian, Finnish,
Italian,
and then obviously English and various different types of English. Cool. You want to hit that?
Yeah.
Will Google changes on cookies have an impact on EPMV? What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, I think moving forward, the changes to the online ecosystem, there will be changes. The current way it stands, programmatic advertising is driven by third-party cookies. So removing third-party cookies means an overhaul of the way that programmatic advertising exists as a concept. So there's going to be a change in the way things happen. There are multiple solutions being touted to this. I think we're investigating some ourselves to see how we can best prepare for this. But it's going to happen, and it's going to be a landscape that everyone will be looking at, irrespective of whether they want it to happen or not. I think there will be changes. It's impossible to say how big of a change it will be. but yes, that I think it will have an impact.
Yeah, I think advertisers still need to connect to an audience. Digital is by far one of the fastest growing ways to do it. The granularity we've had over the last 7 to 10 years has been amazing. It's better than what you've ever really seen before, whether it be television, radio, all of that. So the advertisers themselves are going to have to adjust because they're not going to have access to the granularity of data that they have, but they're still going to have budgets. They still got to connect to an audience. So partnering with Ezoic, especially us, sitting server side for the majority of our clients, really allows us to understand your audience or your traffic. So we'll be able to help bridge that gap and connect both parties. But yeah, there'll be some changes. I don't think we're overly concerned about it at this point, but I think the ecosystem will adjust.
Yeah, I mean, advertisers go where the attention is, and that's online. I think on this one, Michael, with regards to the specific site, it might be something that we best pick up together offline. What I'll do is if you leave your email in the chat as a message to the panelists, I'll be in touch and we can sort something out. Does Ezoic support websites with Infinite Scroll? Infinite Scroll doesn't play particularly nicely with our placeholders. So it's not something that we recommend as a best practice perspective. Would be the answer there, because Infinite Scroll loads client side and we inject all of our code server side. I'm not sure as well how it will play with Google's new metrics like Core Web Vitals, because essentially the page is going to be shifting continuously as the user scrolls down the page. And we know that one of the things that Google's looking to remove with Core Web Vitals is that constant shifting of a page through their metric of cumulative layout shift. So I don't think no, it was really the answer. Like I've seen sites using it, but they don't tend to perform as well on Ezoic as sites that don't use Infinite Scroll. How do you classify content? I believe there's a link in this presentation, so I'll put that in the chat. Let me just stop sharing my screen and I'll get that for you guys now. Because I think that's the next couple of questions is about.
We'll jump to the EPMV. So this is from anonymous attendee. Thank you for joining. Are longer engaged visits more engaged visitors big contributors to EPMV? Yes. It's going to be one of a variety of factors or two of a variety of factors, but the longer people are going to be on your site, the more engaged they're into your content, the more value that they're going to have to audience. That just means that the brand is in front of that user for a longer period of time, which is definitely a good thing. So UX is user experience is a big deal. So the more pages that they see, the longer time that they're on your site, those are all going to be big factors, but they're going to play in with everything else we talked about today. So location, type of content, thinking about who advertises on that type of content, right, is all going to be in there as well. Let's see. All right, from Robert, which metric best represents combined efficiency of high EPMV and high engagement? Lower EPMV could generate more page views, which could generate more total revenue when compared to high PMV with a lower engagement rate. Which metric best represents? I got to digest this one.
So I think it's a case of, is it better to have, correct me if I'm wrong, is it better to have, is it more efficient to have a page with high PMV and lower page views, or more page views and lower EPMV?
I want both. Depends on how frequently you put out content, I would say. I mean,
I guess the more page views, then your EPMV would go up. So like getting visitors to the site is best. Yeah.
I would try to drive traffic. I would try to grow your audience as best as you can. And then if you can get people that are loyal and continuously coming back to your site, seeing multiple pages, they're going to start consuming other content. Then I think you just start tweaking the type of content that you're doing to better sort of align with it. So you incrementally increase your EPMV over time based on that.
Yeah, and EPMV is linked to visits. It's earning per 1,000 visits. So, the more visits you have, will help with the EPMV that way.
That's right.
It's an optimal balance of revenue per page and page views per page. So it's looking at this session as a total rather than, you know, advertisers which will focus on single pages. What you want is that overall session, and treating it as the whole session is what we found is to be the best metric to use to look at site health, which is why we always go back to EPMV. Heather, thank you. I've seen your message in the chat and I've got your email address copied, so I will drop you a message. There's that one done. Emerson, I think we answered your question about infinite scroll already, so if it's okay, I'm going to pause that one. Can you tell me more about mediation and header bidding? Yeah, so mediation is essentially a Zoic doing just that, mediating a third party. The most common third party that we work with for mediation is Google AdSense. And essentially what we do is we allow that to compete versus a Zoic demand, and we mediate it through our tech. So we allow it to compete, and what we do is we allow the system then to make the decisions based on, you know, what's offering the best value, the best for your user engagement metrics and other factors, versus, you know, the Zoic demand. By bringing it in-house, we can see how everything's operating to ensure that as a publisher, you get the best value for your inventory by putting multiple sources against each other. With mediation, it's also important to note that we are doing that, as I've said a few times, we are mediating it. We're not responsible for paying that out. So if you're working with AdSense and you see, hey, I've earned $3 today from mediation, that would be paid out via AdSense, not via a Zoic. Header bidding, Jeff, do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, I mean, header bidding's, you know, it's a great way to just increase competition. So if you look at the various exchanges that we partner with, whether it's AdX or OpenX, and then you've got a variety of different header bidders that come in, it's a great way to just drive additional competition. That was a big focus of us in 2020. So we added a tremendous amount of partners in that area. I think in 2021 right now is we're really focusing in on the top partners. We're focusing on speed, recognizing, you know, who's competing and who's winning, and then just making sure that we're efficient with the competition. So more isn't always better. It's really about quality, I would say, than quantity, but we want to make sure that we're diverse and we have all that in place.
I think it's also important when we think about header bidding is that, you know, we learn over time, and we will mix up who we send to sites based on historical information. Other companies who run header bidding will sort of just serve the same to everyone, irrespective, but the better we understand your audience and your site, you know, we can mix it up to ensure that we're actually serving the right partners for the right visitors. You know, so we're not showing and serving the same header bidder partners in Sweden as we would do in London, because it doesn't make sense, because user intent's different, you know, expectations and ad sizes is different. And again, that's one of the benefits of a Zoic, is that it adapts to wherever you are geographically to ensure that it's offering the best for your individuals, your visitors, sorry. On my website, I blocked most countries except the US. I think we kind of touched on that not being a great idea, just to keep my site from getting hacked. Okay, my site's mainly English based. Does this ads target regions? Do we get paid the same if countries visit our site? Is it better to open up to all sites? I would say the last point is correct. It is better to open up to all sites. With regards to getting hacked, I think there are a couple of third parties that I know people work with who integrate fine with a Zoic. So Securi is one. I know that Cloudflare offer an element of DDoS protection to stop from hacking. So I would say if you're experiencing those sorts of things, I would look into one of those two companies. Both work fine with a Zoic and both would offer you an element of protection against that type of behavior. But yeah, I'd say open it up to all sites, because as we said, by limiting traffic, you're stopping potential outreach and growth in certain areas, which will ultimately cost you money. So if you can get that you know, element fixed, and that's Securi and Cloudflare, I'd look at both of those. I think they both help.
Yeah, it's just another, you know, if you think of it from like just a normal business, like even if it's a restaurant, if a restaurant opens up in Los Angeles and they decide to then open up in Mexico City, it's a new revenue stream for them, right? So this is the same thing as having your traffic open is opening up a new market for you, which is going to increase revenue. as we went through today, revenue is going to be different in each market, and the ads, yes, that we're serving are going to be different. The header bidders that Paul mentioned are going to be different. But it's going to overall drive more traffic to your site, which is going to make you more earnings in the long run as well.
Michael, thank you. I've taken your email address down as well. Robert, do we need to do anything on our end to keep our ads.txt up to date, or is this automatically handled by Zoic? If you're integrated via cloud, so cloud integration, whether it be name servers or through Cloudflare, then that's handled automatically and we update that for you. If you're via WordPress, I believe that's something that the plugin can help with, if I'm not much mistaken.
Cool. Last one. What is a typical EPMV one can expect in a lifestyle niche? I know this can vary based on multiple factors, but can you give a general range? Likewise, can you share a typical EPMV range for automotive space? Yeah, I'd say no. That's the thing. So this is sort of the point of, I think, this entire presentation is this is a question that people always want to know. A lot of publishers are independent businesses and they're connecting in social channels online, and they have friends that run similar niches and they compare. But if you look at our second slide or third slide and you look at the 10 or 12 different variables there, those all play in. And when someone says, hey, I have a lifestyle niche, well, what does that mean? Is it about beaches in California or is it about beaches in Thailand? Night and day different. Are users coming in from Google? Or are they coming in from Bing? Are you driving traffic socially? So it's going to vary. It's going to go from, from $10 to $50. And it also is going to depend on the content, the seasonality. So it totally varies. Same as automotive. There's so many different things you can do in automotive. You can have a site that's about tractors. You can have them about trucks. It could be about Toyota. It could be about GM, General Motors, or Ford. So you just don't know. So I think comparing is the wrong thing to do. I think you can kind of do some homework and some keyword research and get yourself an idea, but know that there's so many different factors that come into play. It's important to factor those in and don't, I wouldn't just take it as, oh, my EPMV is this and my friends is this and something must be right or wrong. There's 100 factors behind that are going to tell a bigger story on why or what. And I'll say this too is, location of traffic is obviously a big deal. That if it's automotive in India versus automotive in the US, night and day different, right? So
also
I can't give you an exact answer, but I think this presentation is designed to kind of help you better understand your traffic, so you can understand like why EPMV is higher in certain areas versus others. As you're looking at expansion, that's where you start factoring those in as to what you're going to create or what you would potentially want to acquire if you're purchasing a site as well. Last one, ad blockers. I don't know if you know that one off the top of your head. That's one I'd have to look.
How do we know? Ad blockers are fairly rudimentary in the way that they work. So they just block all tracking scripts. So within a Zoic, they'll look for certain keywords. So if our analytics and tracking scripts have a Zoic in them, it would just block that as well. So it's quite tricky to say exactly how many don't, or how many do, have an ad blocker active. We know that overall the percentage of, adoption of ad blockers isn't particularly high. In some niches, such as the tech industry, it might be slightly higher than in normals, but the reality is it's not a widespread issue. It's not a case that everyone's missing out on thousands as a result of it. Also, with the rise of mobile browsing, it's much harder to have an ad blocker on mobile device. I would say that there's the potential for ad blockers to be seen more on Chrome traffic, just from the ease of adding extensions. But yeah, no, currently it's not really possible within a Zoic to sort of pinpoint, this is how many have ad blockers on, because they're blocking tracking scripts too. So we can't even tell you those visitors have been to the page.
But yeah, that's one it's sort of out of your control. I mean, I try to focus on what you can control, and that's putting out good quality content, and trying to drive audience to your site. If people are using ad blockers, you can't really prevent it. Most of the ad blockers suck, to be honest. So
I also wouldn't worry about being put off by people who are using ad blockers, because essentially they're trying to get your content for free. So I wouldn't worry about them so much.
Awesome. Well, I think that's it on our side. So I want to thank everybody for listening. Thank you, Paul, for hanging out with me before dinner time. Again, just want to thank you all for joining. We appreciate the partnership. Don't hesitate to reach out to us, chat with a team member in live chat. If you want to get in front of your success managers, just ask, and they'll be happy to meet with you. But again, appreciate all of you, and we wish you the best of luck in 2021.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.